Who are you? A question that falls on deaf ears. Have you forgotten? Of course you have. Your thoughts were never your own. Your memories lost in the unknown. Your existence molded by your fragile psyche. Trapped in the abyss, you reach out only to see a reflection. But that's not you. You slowly feel yourself fading. She has taken over. You are all of her. She is all of you. What you know, feel, fear, love, hate is all her. She is NYX.
What's good, folks? It's KnightmareFrame here with a new Warframe video. NYX is unfortunately not a very popular frame, and it makes sense because she's not a DPS, nuke, or a tank. But hey, Assimilate exists, but it's not the tanking you would think. I'm here to show you that she is an actual beast of a Warframe and severely underestimated. She is a utility and crowd control Warframe, designed to control her environment to then dominate her enemies to get her in the offensive. If that sounds interesting and cool, let's go over her kit. Starting off with her passive. She has a 20% evasion against enemies shooting at her. That's it. Her first ability, Mind Control. NYX is able to control one target. During the cast, the target is stunned for 4 seconds. In this time frame, deal as much damage as you can to the target to give them a damage multiplier buff that can be seen on the buff section of your HUD. For the damage conversion application, the target will ignore any elemental or physical damage. So, if you want a weapon to convert damage into your mind control target, just mod for raw damage, crits, multi-shot, and faction mods. Stealth multipliers also apply on unalerted targets. The controlled target benefits from most defensive and offensive boons that allies can receive, and are immune to incoming damage. As the mind control target benefits from your buffs, NYX also benefits from enemies' defensive boons like Ancient Healers or Shield Ospreys, and utility units that can crowd control enemies or even steal their weapons. A simple radiation proc will prematurely disable the mind control effect. The augment, Mind Freak, allows your mind control target to have a starting damage multiplier that scales with strength, and this bonus is additive to the damage conversion. Pacifying Bolts, her second ability. This is one of the best armor stripping abilities, as it's a cheaper version of Thero Strike, because it only requires 130% strength to fully armor and shield strip. Unfortunately, it's not a permanent strip, and scales off your modded duration, but it has better reach than Thero Strike, as these bolts seek out enemies within their flight path. NYX's bolts also have a nullifying effect that can disable Ancient Healer and Eximus auras, but only in order of priority, as the defense shred always takes priority. The augment, Pacifying Bolts, increases the number of bolts you send out from 6 to 9. Nice. With the additional bolts, your psychic bolts will also gain the ability to stun enemies for additional crowd control. Her third ability, Chaos. NYX casts an aura that stuns enemies around her. After the stun, it will have the enemies perceive each other as NYX, causing chaos among themselves. The enemies won't attack you unless you're too close to them. The augment will leave behind a large visible ring that shrinks over time, but the enemies that enter the ring get affected by chaos for a fraction of its duration. The final ability, Absorb. NYX suspends herself mid-air, immobile and invulnerable to all incoming damage, increasing her aggro, forcing enemies to focus fire onto her, and while in this state, you drain energy per second. During this form, she absorbs the incoming damage and stores it. Once she accumulates enough damage, you can recast the ability to send out an explosion of the accumulated damage, and grant yourself a gun-based damage multiplier for a few seconds, depending on the absorbed amount of damage. While also in this state, taking increased amount of damage will drain your energy even more, and when you run out of energy, you're forcefully pushed out of the state, but still get to release your damage. The augment, Assimilate, allows you to walk slowly and also dodge roll. Yes, you can move, but you're still a very slow tank. Of course, there are ways to propel her forward, whether it's from melee stances, Helminth abilities, and even the operator. Alright, now that you have an idea of how she works, let's take a look at the following build requirements: Helminth and Arcanes. These builds are not for new players and more for people who are looking to improve their gameplay and get the best out there. The first things are the Archon Shards. You need 2 Amber Shards put together to get 50% casting speed, removing the need to ever mod Natural Talent on your builds. The last 3 shards are Crimson Strength Shards to grant you 30% strength, and with this strength, you reach a maximum armor strip requirement for Psychic Bolts. And this way, I don't have to mod for strength on most of the builds. For the Arcanes used in this build, Arcane Energize for the large boost in energy upon orb pickup. Now this Arcane can be replaced if you have 3 Tauforge Amber Shards, and this will allow you to be more flexible with other Arcanes, and this means you will have to mod for strength on your builds. Molt Efficiency for the 36% duration when you have shields active. Very useful for a decent amount of the builds and simple to use. Same with Molt Augmented for the 60% strength increase when you get 250 kills. Now, onto the Helminth abilities. These will be listed in order of the builds that will be showcased. Starting off with Shooting Gallery, Mace's second ability, cast to have a gun jamming aura that stuns enemies for a few seconds. Using the augment Muzzle Flash, you will blind enemies after getting or assisting in 6 kills. This blind isn't restricted by line of sight, and you and allies can trigger it, causing a massive blind effect, as Shooting Gallery can be shared with allies. Helminth number 2, Wrathful Advance, Kullervo's first ability. The quick tap will have you teleport to a target and perform a heavy attack using the mods on your weapon. During and after performing this attack, your melee weapons get a massive crit chance increase. After the heavy attack, you remain with this crit for a certain duration. This crit buff is an absolute crit chance increase, meaning it is calculated after your critical buildup, aka flat crit. This crit buff scales with strength, and how long it lasts depends on your duration. Since it's a Helminth ability, you get a diminished version. So, at base value, you get a 100% flat crit. That is still very, very strong. And the hold cast is the same thing but allows you to choose where to teleport to. The good thing about this mode is that it can have you teleport to any location without enemies, unlike the quick tap mode. Remember, this ability will have all your weapons perform a heavy attack, meaning it will consume your built-up combo. And yes, this ability can also activate incarnate modes. The third Helminth is Pillage. Now, you may be confused as to why I'm using Pillage while NYX already has an armor strip. Well, it's not for the armor strip, but it's for the other benefits. You send out a pulse wave that follows you and steals enemies' defenses, meaning shield and armor. And once this pulse reaches the end, it retracts to you, restoring your missing shields and grants you overshields based on the amount of defenses stolen. Pillage also cleanses you and allies of negative status effects. Helminth number 4 is Silence. This is an invisible aura that stuns enemies who enter its radius. The enemies stunned are susceptible to stealth and cannot perform any special abilities. For example, Eximus units cannot use their unique abilities, and it also removes Violence's annoying nullifying aura. The stun only lasts for 2 seconds and cannot be recast, and once the stun is over, enemies are free to shoot back at you, but still cannot perform their special abilities. The only way to refresh the stun if the enemies are removed from the aura's radius and reintroduced to the ability once again. I primarily use this loadout for when I'm hunting liches or sisters, and NYX is by far the best sister hunter. I know that sounds weird, as she can completely strip the sisters' shields and armor while having Silence, nullifying the hounds and sisters' special ability. The fifth Helminth is Ensnare from Korra. This is a simple ability used to group enemies for so many weapon synergies. It's a recastable grouping ability that can be controlled and synergizes with other grouping tools like Exodia Hunt and Magus Anomaly. And finally, the last Helminth ability, which I use for Disruption level cap, Sickening Pulse. This ability will add stacks to the current status effects on the target and get their timers refreshed. I'll be synergizing this ability with the Gas DOT. It will take the current DOT damage and add 10 stacks of that. The new stacks will not double dip with faction mods, but deal 1 times more damage, except for heat because it's busted. The ability itself is not affected by strength or bane mods, or any other buffs. All it does is refresh and stack up the current current DOTs. If you cast it again, it will remove the previous multipliers of the stacks and give you new gas DOTs with no multipliers, since the ability itself does no damage. So I'm applying the biggest gas DOT I can with a single attack, which happens to be a heavy attack, and doubling that application with Sickening Pulse. Alright, let's take a look at the first build using Shooting Gallery. This build is all about being agile, keeping yourself on the move as you're clearing hordes of enemies while also keeping them crowd controlled as they barely or never touch you. The Arcanes for this build are going to be Energize and Molt Efficiency. Taking a look at the build. In the aura, I have Brief Respite for the energy to shield conversion to help me refresh my shield gate instance, and this aura is paired well with a Decaying Dragon Key to reduce the shield value. Duration at 183% with Primed Continuity and Constitution, bringing my Mind Control to 82 seconds, Psychic Bolts to 20 seconds, Chaos to 45 seconds, and Shooting Gallery Stun at 54 seconds, while its Blind sits at 11 seconds. So this is a decent amount of duration. Range at 175% with Stretch and Augur Reach. This is going to be a staple. Range on this build is beneficial for Chaos and Shooting Gallery. And since this is a very mobile and agile build, I'll be using a parkour mod to increase my movement, and in this case, I'm using Firewalker. And keeping up with the agility, my melee is going to be the Praetus for its sprint speed and parkour velocity evolutions, while the other weapons and focus schools are up to you. Alright, now on to build number 2, using Wrathful Advance for the flat crit chance and teleportation. This Helminth was chosen because this is an Assimilate build. The fourth ability, Augment. Since I'm going to be heavily slowed and also not being able to jump, this Helminth was a perfect combination. As for the weapons, I'll be synergizing Wrathful Advance with the Ceramic Dagger Incarnate. This weapon has an interesting gimmick. When you heavy attack, activating its Incarnate mode, you send out 2 projectiles that are spectral forms of your daggers that deal damage on impact and produce a 5-meter AoE explosion. On direct hits, the projectiles deal IPS damage, while the explosions deal heat damage with a forced impact proc. The projectiles do not scale off regular base damage mods and arcanes, but it is affected by modified base damage from Incarnate perks and Incarnate activation, along with universal base damage multipliers, like Vigorous Swamp, Arcane Arachne, and base damage abilities, like Vex Armor and Amp. However, Condition Overload is a weird exception because the projectiles will scale multiplicatively with your universal base damage modifiers only on direct hits and not the AoE. The second evolution, Gun and Blade, will have me build up 100 initial combo counter by killing enemies with my primary weapon. Evo 3, Adept Reflexes for the additional 20 initial combo, and when you pair this up with Evo 2, you will get a total of 7 times initial combo. This buff will not go away unless you forcefully revive from death. And finally, Evolution 4 with Absolute Valor for the 30% base crit added onto your original 10%, which will give you a base value of 40% crit on the Ceramic Dagger. Alright, now with the build. In the aura, I have Steel Charge for the basic melee damage, but mostly for the capacity increase. Enemy Sense for the consistent enemy pings. Range at 190% with Overextended, mostly used to increase the teleport range of Wrathful Advance to 23 meters. And to counteract the strength loss, I'm using Intensify. Remember, this NYX has 30% additional strength with the Archon Shards. Vigorous Swamp for the damage increase for Ceramic Dagger's projectiles. Prime Flow for the large energy pool, alongside Equilibrium, paired with the Synth Set mods on your Panzer Vulpaphyla. Now, onto the weapon builds. For my primary weapon, I'm using the Cedo. This will be used to stack up my Gun and Blade evolution, while also being one of the main elemental primers with its alternate fire. And my secondary weapon is the Epitaph, which will be my main primer, just a simple Virulent Heat build with secondary Cucumber. And now for the Ceramic Dagger. It's modded for raw, corrosive damage and crits. Now let's calculate how much crit we'll get in total. I get 248% crit chance at 7 times combo with Blood Rush, Sacrificial Steel, and Gladiator Might. And once you add Wrathful Advance, you will be well over 300% crit chance, so that's consistent red crits. Make sure you prime enemies, perform a weapon swap before heavy attacking with Wrathful Advance for the bonus damage. Now, For the third build, this is using Pillage for the additional supportive utilities. Another build that doesn't require a Decaying Dragon Key, as Pillage will replenish your shields and give you another instance of a shield gate while also clearing status effects. Since this build will have a bit more strength, I will also be using the first ability Augment to increase the damage my mind control target will deal. Take a look at the build. Growing Power in the Aura for the 25% additional strength when you proc a status effect. Pair this up with the 30% strength shards, Umbral Intensify, and Molt Augmented, I will gain 259% strength. And of course the other similar mods from my previous builds, along with the Mind Freak Augment. And of course the weapons and focus schools are down to you. If you want a bit more strength, I highly suggest the Madurai Focus School. Now, the fourth build. This is the Lich and Sister Hunting build, using Silence to stun enemies and disable their special abilities. This build has base range because we don't want to go any higher with Silence, so it'll be easy to move in and out. With 100% range, you have 20 meters on Silence. You would usually go lower to 79% range, but with 100% range, your Chaos will still be useful with a 25 meter coverage at base. Another great thing is that this build has 207% duration, so your silence lasts for 62 seconds. And the weapons can be whatever you want. But if you're going to go after sisters and liches, then I suggest shotguns, as they are multi-pellet weapons perfect to go against their damage attenuation. The fifth build, using Ensnare as the Helminth. This is a useful grouping tool perfect for gas DPS or any weapon and elemental combos that benefits from grouping. This build is using two augments, Chaos Sphere and Pacifying Bolts, for the additional crowd control. Pacifying Bolts increases my Psychic Bolts from 6 to 9, and Chaos Sphere adds another layer of crowd control because this whole build is about setting up for a big combo kill. The build balances decent range and duration to help upkeep the abilities and crowd control capabilities. Of course, the weapons are up to you. Latron Incarnon, Gas Bows, and Glaives are pretty solid for this build. And lastly, the sixth and final build. The builds that I used against my level camp run against infested enemies, but also can be used in other disruption runs, as this build is just a bit too strong against Grineer units. This build is using the Sickening Pulse Helminth to instantly stack up the gas damage and have its damage scale drastically. I will also be using the Aura Empowered Blades to increase my status chance and status effect damage with a heavy attack. This bonus is granted to you as it drains 90 shields, and if you don't have any shields, you don't get the bonus. This aura is multiplicative with other damage mods and is applied twice, so basically like a universal faction mod. Alright, let's take a look at the build. It has the staple mods, but with two glider mods for the increase in crit chance when you build up combo. Think of it like a second blood rush. Vigor Swamp triggers when you swap from your primer to your melee for that heavy attack. Very nice for some additional increase in damage. The same Epitaph build with secondary Cucumber for the additional status procs for the bonus damage on targets. And finally, my weapon of choice is the Tenet Grigori, because it has an amazing passive where it pauses your combo when the melee is holstered, so you don't have to worry about losing your combo. And this Tenet Grigori is bonus heat, so with one mod alone, I can get a combined element. If you don't have the Tenet Grigori, there are other melees with innate heat. Just make sure to run 2 Dexterity Arcanes in both of your guns for the combo duration. A basic elemental build with no range mods because this is a single target build in Disruption. Quickening for the attack speed and chance to gain combo faster. Amalgam Organ Shatter for the crit damage and heavy attack wind-up speed. And Reflex Coil for the heavy attack efficiency, so you use up less combo when you heavy attack. Alright, boys and girls, these are the NYX builds. Hopefully you can see NYX in a new light, because she is a superb Warframe. Anyway folks, that has been it from me. I do hope you've enjoyed and learned something from this video. And if you did, feel free to leave a like, share, and
subscribe
for more Warframe content, streams, and so much more. Do refer to the description. Thanks for watching, and as always, peace. Bye-bye now.